Hello fellow Mithrunians, and welcome to a progress video. So today I'm going to show some of the far terrain stuff in the new Mithruna engine. This is a test build, but we're getting pretty close to something that I can release to you guys, or at least a limited set of users. You got your standard sort of Mithruna block types. We're still using all the same old textures. Eventually there'll be sort of a beautification process that I upgrade some of these textures and some of the graphics and stuff. Currently I'm just porting basically everything that the old engine had to the new engine, and here we're going to see some progress bits on the far terrain. So let's head outside. One of the goals of the new engine is to have sort of these moments where you come around a corner and you say, whoa, look at that valley. These sort of chill, whoa moments. Right now the fractal that's generating this world is just sort of a quick and dirty fractal. I know at least to me, the terrain looks kind of cool, but it's sort of repetitive in its undulation. Pretty much if you go over to one of these ridges and look out, you're going to see another valley, and it'll look way different, but it's the same sort of whoa moment every time, and that gets repetitive after a while as you walk around. The real fractal will have sort of more differences. There'll be wide plains and cliffs and things that takes a little longer to generate, and I'm constantly deleting my world and restarting it as I test things, and the extra time it takes to generate the fractal eats away at my development time. So currently we have this quick and dirty one that shows off all the stuff, different sort of flora and wetness levels and so on. But today we're focusing on the far terrain. In old Mithruna we just had the block world, and that's where you can kind of see the edge of where the blocks end and the far terrain starts. That's a 128 meter clip, which in the old Mithruna engine was not the farthest. You could go out to 192, I think was the farthest. And so one of the cool things about having the far terrain is we get to shorten this clip range, and we still get like decent graphics. In the real engine, when the game is released, people who play it will be able to set that. I've got it currently locked at 128. One other thing I'll point out before we start wandering around is there's these dark lines that run through the terrain, and if I bop up in the air a little bit here, you'll see it goes down here and turns into sort of stone here. These are at the 120 or 1024 meter boundaries of the world, so each of these is those lines represent a tile. It's just one way as I'm wandering around for me to keep track of things. Plus it's kind of fun to pretend that they're roads and that you can walk around them, but real roads will be done a different way. If we look at the overhead map, we can see that this is us, and these lines represent the same lines as on the map. And before we get wandering around, the interesting thing is in the original Mithruna engine, if you log into the server and you wander around, 90% of the stuff that's built there, including the whole spawn town and the stuff around the spawn town, can fit in one of these little things. Well, the spawn town can fit here, and then there's some stuff that we built, in that kind of range, and then some stuff back here. And then obviously, as far as distance-wise, people have, wandered around, but never more than maybe this many squares. So we can already see the scale of the world is completely different. And the interesting thing will be balancing that so that so it doesn't get boring. The other thing I'll mention before we start wandering around is you see buildings are dotted sort of all over the place. This is another sort of stress test of the engine and the speed at which it can generate those things, because basically what it does is it finds any flat terrain and decides randomly to place a building there. There's no towns or rhyme or reason to this, and it's actually harder for the engine to generate these far little buildings when they pop off randomly around, because it has to generate all the blocks around it and stuff. In the real engine you'll have to wander a little bit before you see a town. maybe 3 tiles before you'd ever see another town. There'll be other interesting things to look at. There's a whole balancing operation that has to happen in the generation. Anyways, but let's start wandering around, and it's getting boring, and I could talk about all this stuff while we walk. So we're going to check out this tower over here. We'll go ahead and run so we get there a little quicker. And you can see how the transitions work. One of the beautification processes that'll come in a later version, it's going to take a certain number of hours, that is to, in artists you call it feathering, feather the edges to make this near terrain and far terrain match a little better. So as the trees pop in, they'll pop in a little less. And switch up here. That's the first far building we saw. It's one of those little classic thatched Mithruna cottages from the, that I could spawn in the world. If we jump in here, it's got the standard sort of Mithruna tiles. Kind of cool. Those are dotted around along with those other kinds of buildings. But we're heading over towards this that's tower over here. The land is just dotting these towers everywhere right now. Eventually that's going to be the spawn tower, and I'll have some other kind of magic wizard towers and things that'll be different. But this is what the spawn tower will look like, which is when you pop into the world, you'll pop into the top of this tower, which does a few things in the game-wise. It does a few things. It gives the player immediately a view of their surroundings so they can get their bearings, because up in the top of that tower we can see around. The other thing, it's a protected space, so if for whatever reason a world generates the spawn point right in the middle of a den of wolves or whatever other creatures we might have around, you're guaranteed some safety right as you spawn in. And depending on how the game develops and stuff, there might be some loot and so on in there, starting loot. There's going to be rules on, so this is the little spawn tower, and look, we've got shiny marble now. Because one of the other things is there'll always, the little rules in the generation that there'll always be a town or settlement within a certain amount of distance to the spawn tower. So yeah, you'd spawn in this little pedestal up here, shoot down through the sky, come out, you can look around, see what's nearby. Oh, there's a little building over there, and so on and so forth. So since we're just wandering around, we're going to head up to this ridge up here next. So you can see the different views and things. Yeah, I'm just running around, bouncing around. We can also run super fast. That's faster than the real user would ever be able to generate. You can actually run right through the terrain and fall through the bottom of the world. So we won't be doing too much of that. Yeah, and I've got a super jump where you can just jump in the middle of the air. But I find if you fly too much, it sort of ruins the scale of the world. The flight mechanic that'll be for the flying races will have to be balanced a little bit to account for that, and cloud cover and things. Because if you fly way up in the sky, it sort of messes with the scale of the world, and it doesn't feel so big to me anymore. I mean, it definitely feels vast, and you can see really far, but the horizon starts to mess up, and it doesn't quite feather as well. Anyway, we're going to continue down this way, and it's going to take us a while to fall because we're really high. Oops. Yeah, let's just fly over here. Alright. I told myself I wasn't going to fly up in the air when I did this walkthrough. I was kind of trying to do a real-time walk around, but oh well. So yeah, classic Mithruna textures, we'll see that grass texture a lot. One of the beautification processes I want to do is sort of round over these edges a bit, give them a little more depth, and so we've got this little house over here. Somewhere around here was a dungeon. Yeah, there it is. Little dungeon entrance. These are not. None of these are really randomly generated. They're randomly selected from a preset. You know, it was 12 buildings or something that I randomly generated with the generator tool, but the actual random generation of buildings and structures is not integrated into the generator, the world generator yet. But here we just have something that I kind of built from. I was trying to test generation of underground structures. So we've just got a couple rooms and kind of working on dungeon styles and things. It's just kind of cool to have a test to make sure that it blends in with the terrain and so on. So let's go back over to this little building over here. And we're going to kind of run by that guy. He's a one-story house. We're heading over to this gap because we want to see different kinds of terrain. In the, to Twitter, I posted a screenshot the other day of a little house sitting on the edge of a coastline. And I'll show you that house. And walk over to it, and while we're walking over there I can talk about sort of some of what we're seeing in the next steps and so on. So let's shoot over a little bit. Oh, there's a big house over here. Oh yeah, so we've got a river. The river graphics are not their final form yet. For those who are into like detail, you can see that the normals on the surfaces aren't right. We're reflecting the sun a little differently than we should. There's a little glitch there in the leveling, but it was enough to get the code in place, and I'm trying really hard to get to gameplay. The old engine, I spent so much time tweaking visuals and graphics, and we never ended up with gameplay. So I'm trying to do the minimum amount of work to get to gameplay. And so sometimes that means leaving things. Like currently, also, if you pop into the water, there's no underwater effect. This is also not the real river generator code. It basically, for each of these 1024 by 1024 tiles, in the world, we're in this tile right now. For each of these 1024 tiles, it finds a high spot, and then the highest spot in that tile, and then generates a river, until it hits water or until it gets to a point where it can't go any lower for that particular tile. So every one of these tiles will have a little river generated. Sometimes they make sense and sometimes they don't. In the real world, rivers will generate across tiles and make a little more sense. But this was enough to test the carving of the terrain to put the river in, and leveling of the water surface, what happens at the edges and things, which is currently not right, but good enough for testing. Once we have creatures and stuff that we can fight and dungeons to explore and whatnot, then we can worry about the smaller things. So let's shoot over this river. So now we can see there's the different terrain types here. These are controlled. The fractal has a bunch of layers, in addition to the terrain, and there's sort of a dryness, wetness, climate, a bunch of different fractals layered on top of each other, and that sort of decides, what quote-unquote biome we're in, because the fractal determines, well, hey, this should be wet or cold. So if it's cold, we have snow. If it's dry, we have sand. And then the different plant types could be selected from that. Though currently we just have the original Mithruna trees that I ported. Eventually there'll be palm trees, and you might notice there's no flora around here. I haven't ported the grass yet because I want to do the grass and bushes and things in a completely different way. One other thing. Oh, I think I've made this walk a few times. So I think we hit a place where I can talk about rivers again. There's the Fartrain, I think, is pretty interesting, and the Far buildings. The rivers have not had a full treatment for the Far terrain yet, and so we'll talk about that in a minute. So let me just shoot over here a little faster. So you can see the terrain keeps up with us, which is pretty good. One of the things that the reason that we have sort of this Far terrain is because when you're flying around, you'll want to fly a little bit faster than walking, or it's a little lame. So as the winged creatures want to fly around, they can do so. It does weird things to the popping, because like here we see this building is using this building's using the near blocks, and this building is using the far blocks, which I may go into in another video. It should have been impossible. It should not have worked. It was one of those dumb ideas that turned out to work for how to implement this, but you see it gets really blocky before it pops into the regular building. It has not gone through the beautification process. I literally ported the same color texture from the desert terrain demos that you may have seen. Anyway, here's what I was going to talk about with the river. We've got a Far river that carves into the ground, and that part works okay, but it's not perfect, because if we were to go there, the river actually comes up higher against the terrain. These would also be rapids, and there might even be a waterfall up there. I'm not sure, but there's no waterfall rendering, no rapids rendering, and in the Far terrain there'll actually be a particle effect eventually where you'll see the mist coming off of that, so from a distance you can see waterfalls. None of that stuff's not implemented yet, and it'll wait. The principles are there. So yeah, so see, it gets a little ugly as we get closer, and then eventually as the real block world pops in, it all lines up and then looks much better. So there's that little building on the coastline. If we pop open the map, you can see where we are. We're right along that coastline here. So let's just fly a little faster here. I used up all my talking points early in the video, so I have to speed things along now. So you can see in the upper right, there's that thing is talking. It shows some VEL : is showing our velocity when we're running flat like this. It's about 6-7 velocity running. If we walk a little over 4, that's how fast we're going. Original Mithruna engine walk speed was 3 meters per second, I think, and then yeah, no underwater graphics yet. Walk speed was 3 meters per second, and run was like 6.5 or 6, something like that. So you can walk and run faster. And some of that balance will happen when there's a third-person view and I can see what the animations are doing on the character. Yeah, because right now, there's the other thing. Yeah, right now we're just a ball on the ground with our eye floating above us. So as we walk around, we're just this ball, and we can climb up things, auto climb, just like the old Mithruna engine. So here's that little house on the beach. This actually turns out to be a little island that we're on, which is why I had to jump over that water to get here. So we can go in here, come up the stairs, auto walk up the stairs. You can see how there's like this cool view. Yes, if we were to pop back out, and I'll talk about the status of things and what's coming next for all of you who waited this long. But you can see if I pop up here, we can see this was a little island that actually doesn't connect to the land. Kind of cool. So one of the things that comes next is that I want to release a early version, basically this version of the engine where we're walking around in, to a select audience of, basically the original backers of Mithruna, if they want, and the people who are funding the open source development that underlies this engine called MOS, the Mithruna open source software. Basically, any of the donors and backers, original backers, will have early access to like these kind of test builds. There's some things I have to finish right now. The only block you can place is the dirt block, and you can remove it. You can place like light blocks, different light blocks. Yeah, but so we have to add at least the minimal amount of tools. Yeah, there's already a scripting engine built in, and you can see it's been outputting things. That's how these are implemented. The other thing, so this is sort of was my original list for a minimum release to you guys, and I think for this initial release, I'm not going to fix the sky and the stars. I'm not going to do the time-based day-night stuff. I think that people can have pretty fun walking around without that, and get a sense for what that far terrain and near terrain will look like and how it will perform. Because I mean, you guys see it running on my system, and you may make assumptions on the power of my particular machine, but I tell you I have an older graphics card running this right now. And the sun's in a good position in the sky for keeping your bearings because it's there to the east. And, oops. And so, basically release a version of this as early as possible. I'm hoping as early as next weekend, which is, I guess, the 27th of March. And get this into some people's hands other than me to test it. Play around with it a little bit. Working towards a June release of a pre-alpha, which would have sort of more features. I'm going to try not to make any promises. Life tends to get in the way as soon as I do that. But this is where we are. The other question is, so I mentioned one could ask the question, hey Paul, why did you do all this far terrain stuff? Mithruna was pretty far along. Why did you redo all this and do this far terrain stuff? And well, the short answer is that, well, I like it, but the longer answer has to do with build height. I wanted higher build height. Currently this engine supports a ocean depth of 128 meters and then a build height of like 512 over that. The total height from 0 to max build height is, I think, 640 meters, which is pretty high. And as soon as you raise the build height, it makes near clips look really stupid. Like if you were up at the high build height and you could just see this little postage stamp around yourself. And I've thought about, if you guys comment in the video comments that you want to see it, I could do a sort of a study showing you why far terrain is necessary, by showing you what near terrain would look like if this was the Mithruna engine with higher build height and so on, and why progressing out to each of the different layers was sort of necessary to get the the final parameters I wanted, which was 512 meter above sea height, building or land generation, and being able to build another 64 or so meters above that, and then like a max flying height. We're currently about 520. We're heading up to 600. I think the max flying will be around 700 meters, and that'll really be not like a hard limit, but basically by the time you get up to this level, the cloud cover will be pretty thick and the winds will be so severe that it'll be hard to fly, and you'll have to drop back down to gain any control of where you're going. But that'll present some potentially interesting gameplay with the airships and stuff as well. If you go too high, it starts to become harder to control. All future stuff. This is where we are. I've rambled on for long enough now, and I'm going to try to produce this unedited and then with some annotations, because you all voted on Twitter that you wanted the annotations. So I will try to add some overlay text and annotations and things. Anyway, thanks you for joining the video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. We must feed the algorithm. And if you think about it, share with your friends if you think they would be interested in the development that's going on. There's 2 levels to this. There's the open source software that's underneath it, which would be interesting to Java game developers potentially. And then there's just Mithruno, which I'm trying to bring back to life and get a release out this year. A pre-alpha release in June, and then hopefully a alpha by the end of the year. We'll see. And that is it. Thanks for joining me on this, and I'll see you guys online.